Okay, good morning. If you guys can take your seat, we'll go ahead and get started. And so before we begin, because today, due to the weather, we decided to offer this option Builders Conference as a webinar. So I want to give the individuals who are on the webinar today an opportunity to make sure that they can hear us before moving on. So I'm waiting for some type of notification from my team member to let me know that those who are calling in can hear us. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I can hear y'all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Okay, my name is Trina Miles, and I am the director of the Division of Workforce Services Adult Education Section. So welcome to our 2020 through 2024 RFP grant application process. So I would like to start off by saying you may ask questions. Today is an opportunity for you guys to ask questions, and we're going to go over the RFP application, and we strongly encourage you to ask the questions as we go through the presentation. Please note that we have a stenographer with us today to record the meeting. So when asking a question, please state your first and last name and the organization you represent. Please speak loudly and clearly so that your questions may be recorded. For those of you who are joining us via webinar or phone, the mute feature is deactivated to minimize noise. If you have a question, please type it in the text box along with your name and organization you represent. Please make sure that those of you who are joining us via webinar, that when you write your question into the box, that you respond to everybody versus the presenter, so that everyone has an opportunity to view the question. Someone on site, so those of you who have a question, someone on site will answer the question on your behalf using your name, first and last name, and the organization you represent. So in other words, if you have a question, what you need to do is email us in the chat box. Someone here on site will read your question out loud, and then we will respond to your question. So following today's Builders Conference, we would not be able to respond to any questions verbally. However, you all have an option of emailing us at adulted@arkansas.gov, and we will respond there. We have a RFP questions and answers spreadsheet that is located on our website. And each week we update this list twice a week. And on that list, it includes the date as well as the person answering the question and a response to that particular individual. So today we will cover the purpose of the RFP application, including the application process, the timeline, who is eligible to apply, who is eligible to participate in adult education services, the required activities under this law if you receive funding. In addition, we will go over the evaluation process that we will utilize in evaluating your application using a rubric. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is located here on the screen, is the Public Law 113-128 that governs how adult education should be administered. Adult education is under the Title II program of the Adult Education Family Literacy Act. Before I turn the presentation over to Bridget Kreiner, our Associate Director, I want to provide a few housekeeping tips for those who are here today. We have bathrooms on each of the floors of this building. The nearest one is to my left around the corner. We have drink refreshments in the back of the room. So, and if you have not done so, we would need you guys to sign in, but we're going to give you a break about 45 minutes so you can sign in then. For those who are joining us by the webinar today, we need you to send an email in the chat box with your first and last name and the organization that you represent so that we can have a recording of who has or who has participated today. Those of you who were just calling in on the phone, we just need you to send us an email at that same address as well. Any questions so far? So please feel free, today is the day that whatever questions or concerns you have regarding the RFP application, I'm assuming that most of you guys have had an opportunity to read through it. This is the day that you want to ask all of those questions, because following the RFP or the bidders conference today, we would not be able to answer any direct questions regarding the RFP, because we want to make sure that it's a direct and equitable process and that everyone has the same opportunity to the information. Okay, so there are no dumb questions. Feel free. Chances are there are probably about 15 other people in this room that have the same question. So without further ado, if there are not any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget Kreiner.
Thank you, Dr. Miles. Okay. Again, feel free to ask any questions as we go through this process, and please be sure to identify yourself before doing so. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the purpose of this RFP. The purpose of it is so that we can assist adults in, one, to become literate and obtain the knowledge and skills that they need to become employed and to be self-sufficient. Also, we want to assist adults who are parents or family members to assist children in their education, and also to give additional opportunities for them economically. We further want to make sure that we are able to assist adults in attaining a secondary school diploma. And for us here in the state of Arkansas, we use the GED test to do that. But we also provide an Arkansas high school diploma. And we want to make sure that we help them to transition to post-secondary education or training. And to do that, we often utilize career pathways. We also want to make sure that we assist immigrants and other individuals who are English language learners in improving their reading, writing, speaking of the English language, also their mathematics skills, and in the area of citizenship. We want to prepare them as well. So for our current adult education providers, those who already receive funds through this agency, current providers must apply and be approved under this current RFP in order to continue receiving state funds. So if you, and as you can see here, that is a state requirement. So keep in mind, everything that we talk about here in terms of requirements are federal requirements. If there are any requirements imposed by the state, they are indicated throughout the application. So if a program that currently receives funding does not apply under this RFP, they would not be able to receive federal or state funding. So that's important to note. So even though this RFP is for federal funds only, the state funds would not be available to a program that is not awarded under this RFP. So let's talk a little bit about the application. This application is based on the 13 federally defined considerations in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act of 2014, Title II, Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. And again, any state-specific requirements are noted as such. So the process. Step one of the process, we will receive those applications from all applicants. Those are due on March 6th at 4 p.m. Step two, we will conduct, the adult education section will conduct pre-screens based on demonstrated effectiveness. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation. We will then, those applications that do not demonstrate effectiveness will be declined and will not move forward through the process. So it's very important that a program demonstrates or an applicant demonstrates effectiveness. Those that have shown demonstrated effectiveness will be forwarded to the review committee. That's a committee who will review all of those applications, and the relevant local workforce development boards. So the board for your agency, where your agency is located, will receive that. They will also provide an evaluation of the proposal, and that will be included in the overall evaluation. Applications are then scored according to the rubric which you've been provided, and declined applications are informed and given the opportunity to appeal. And that appeal process is detailed in the application. We will next, awarded applicants are informed once all appeals have been reviewed. Grant awards are then sent to those applicants that are awarded, and the awarded applicants will meet with the adult education section program advisors to submit budgets and all other required documents in order to begin the new fiscal year. This is the timeline which is provided within the RFP, and it details the entire process that I just talked about. So, an eligible provider of demonstrated effectiveness. For a provider to be eligible for these funds, one must demonstrate effectiveness. They must be currently located and providing services within the state of Arkansas, though that does not necessarily mean that they have to provide services in the area that they are applying for. They must be an eligible provider of demonstrated effectiveness, which means that for a program, for an eligible provider that has been funded previously, they must provide performance data required under Section 116 to demonstrate past effectiveness. So our providers that are currently funded, we have a system by which we do that, which is the LACES system. An eligible provider that has not been previously funded under Title II must provide performance data that does demonstrate the past effectiveness in serving basic skills deficient eligible individuals, including evidence of success in achieving outcomes. So however, the eligible provider may have provided services to those who may be basic skills deficient, they would also show that they have demonstrated effectiveness. And this question came up, a question came up previously about that, but just to give a little more information. So even though, well, we'll get into that in just a moment. So an eligible provider, the data must be from the previous 2 program years. So that would be from July 1 of 2017 to July 30th of 2019, or a program, an entity may use the calendar years, January 1 of 2018 to December 31st of 2019. That's the minimum number of years that we're looking for in terms of showing demonstrated effectiveness. So you would need to provide data that shows that that the agency has served individuals that have low levels of literacy in reading, writing, math, English language acquisition, if that is applicable, and show the outcomes for participants related to employment, attaining a secondary school diploma or its equivalent, and transition to post-secondary education and training. So these are the types of the areas we're looking for to see data for in order to demonstrate effectiveness. Also, we want to see a brief summary that describes and analyzes the data that you've submitted. So once you've provided the actual data, we also would like an analysis of how that shows your effectiveness in that area. So the data that you provide may include, but it is not limited to, the number and percent of individuals that make educational progress through formal assessments or for overall formal assessments or in one of those areas that we talked about. Also attaining a secondary credential, those that transition to and complete post-secondary institution and educational programming, those that enter, retain, or improve employment. So those who received a job, those who maintained their job, or those who got a better job. So let's talk a little bit about an eligible individual. When we talk about an eligible individual, we're talking about who are we eligible to serve with these funds. That would be someone who is at least 16 years of age, who also is not enrolled or required to be enrolled in school. So they would have some formal documentation of being released from school if they are, especially under the age of 18. Someone who is also either basic skills deficient, does not have a secondary school diploma or is recognized equivalent, or is an English language learner. So someone who is at least 16 years old, who's not required to be in school, and also is one of these items here, either basic skills deficient, does not have a high school diploma or GED, or is an English language learner. So we may have someone who is, say, from another country, who has a doctorate degree from their native language, from their native country, but is learning the English language. We are able to assist that person. Also, someone who is a native of this country, who is not an English language learner, but is basic skills deficient. So we find a lot of that with people who still just need to get up to par with their skills in order to prepare for college level courses. So for service areas, applicants may apply for the service area that they will provide services. So all counties included in the service area listed in the application would have to be addressed in the RFP application. So in the proposal, those areas, if you choose an area that has, say, 3 counties, your proposal would need to address all 3 counties. Each service area listed contains anywhere from 1 to 5 counties. So they vary depending on where the location. When we talk about the required activities, these are activities that must be provided with these funds. So for an entity that is looking to submit a proposal, you would need to provide all of these activities. And those include adult education and literacy, English language acquisition, workforce preparation, integrated education and training, which we'll talk more about that with as we go through these items, digital literacy and financial literacy, the last 2 being state requirements, as you can see here. Then we have allowable activities. So the previous activities are required. These are additional activities that you can provide. And that includes workplace adult education and literacy activities, family literacy activities, and integrated English literacy and civics education, which we'll also discuss more about, but is highly related to the integrated education and training that we talked about in required activities. Okay. So at this time, I will pass the mic to Sarah Yeager.
Thank you, Bridget. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the grant awards for this RFP. As stated before, this is for federal funds. And so one of those would be our direct and equitable, or D&E funds. And that will be determined in the funding process based on need and performance. D&E funds can be used to serve individuals at any education level. So that's ABE levels 1 through 6, as well as all ESL levels. So those funds can directly support services for them. Our 2 optional additional federal funds are correctional and institutional, which are instructional services to those in local correctional facilities or other institutions. And then we have our integrated English literacy and civics education, which is instructional services that integrate the English language acquisition along with the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, and may include workforce training. We'll go into the details of each of those grants later in the presentation. The grant duration are awarded on a year-to-year basis. While this RFP is from July 1, 2020 to June 30th of 2024, grant funds are done on a year-to-year basis. Award grantees may be provisionally awarded funds for a maximum of those 4 years. Any provisional grantees will need to be reviewed at the 6-month and 12-month post-award. So if anybody receives a provisional award, just be aware that you will be reviewed at 6-month and 12-month intervals. Okay, so in the RFP application, it goes through some program management and standards. We have a question, so I'll pause.
Nick Robin asked, is it safe to assume that for ABE, GAE funds, we will not receive our award notifications for 2021 until after the RFPs have been reviewed, scored, and award letters sent to each provider?
And what institute organization is he with?
NWTI.
Okay, so all grant awards, since this is strictly for federal funds, if you are a current provider and you're awarded this RFP, you will also receive state funds. All award letters will be sent out at the same time. So when the award letter and grant funds that are determined for D&E, if you are a current provider and will receive those state funds, you will receive all of those letters at the same time. Was that clear? Any other questions at this time? Okay, so we'll go through the adult education program and management. So if you're a grant awardee, you need to be aware of some of these processes and standards and requirements that we have. So the first thing, of course, is you'll need to understand and abide by our adult education policies and procedures, the National Reporting System, which is our federal guidance of how and what we report, our Arkansas Assessment Policy, core indicators of performance, and then the standards of a quality adult education program. I'm not going to go into detail of all of these. You can read definitions and descriptions within the RFP application on the pages indicated. A few of the highlights we do want to touch on are our performance measures. So we have our core indicators. Our first one is our measurable skill gains. This has to do with what a student or an individual is able to do while in the program. So as you notice, there are benchmarks for the individual educational functioning levels, ABE levels 1 through 5. Level 6 does not have a benchmark, and then all ESL levels. While each of those has their individual benchmark, we also have a total average, which needs to be met federally. As you notice, for each year, they do increase by 1%. So you can see that it is a move to progress through the years. Please take note that these benchmarks for all levels and the MSG average will be determined and finalized by our federal agency, OCTAE, or the Office of Career and Technical Adult Education. So these may change in the future depending on what OCTAE directs us. The second indicator are follow-up measures, and these have to do, as you can see, with after an individual exits adult education programs. So as you can see, there are 7 measures. So we have employment, post-secondary, accomplishing a credential, and effectiveness of serving employers. The measurement and descriptions are located there, and benchmarks are to be determined. At this time, we do not have benchmarks set by OCTAE, and we do not, while we expect it to be in the near future, we don't have a specific date that those will be released. That will be dependent on OCTAE. Okay, in addition to our policies, we also have program standards. So program planning, administration, curriculum instruction, educational gains, staffing and staff development, student support services, and then recruitment and retention plans. And again, those full descriptions are located within the RFP application. So these are the areas that we see as program standards, or areas that each program should address. In addition, we have consolidated delivery of services, opportunity to learn standards, duration and intensity of instructional programs, along with attendance and wait list policies. Okay. And again, our requirements for documentation. So you want to have a system to document attendance, recommendation for class sizes, personnel requirements, professional development, required trainings, meetings, and reporting as outlined by the state. Some of those required reportings include, but are not limited to, initial approved budgets, monthly expenditure reports, an annual final budget that includes all revenue and local match, carryover and excess carryover budgets, an inventory submission, quarterly and financial reports, as well as any ad hoc reports that are requested by the adult education section throughout the entire grant period. For records, you want to ensure that your financial records are retained for at least 5 years from the last day of the program, or longer if there's an ongoing investigation or audit. Monitoring and evaluation is done by the adult education program advisors who monitor programs to ensure compliance with all of our policies and procedures. In addition, the adult education section has a quality assurance team that will conduct risk assessments in order to ensure proper technical assistance and compliance from programs. It's a process used to evaluate variables associated with grants by assigning a level of risk. So again, some of examples, and you can see the full list within the RFP application. These are just a few. So a provider receiving a large amount of grants may indicate a higher risk. So notice the use of may. It's not an absolute, but it may indicate a higher risk. A provider with significant amount of findings during a program review may indicate a higher risk. And on the other side, a provider that meets reporting deadlines, consistently submits correct budgets, may indicate a lower risk. So those are just a few examples from the risk factor. So back to the application. So we have a few submission requirements. If you choose to submit a preferred method electronic, you must submit the completed application with all requested attachments to adulted@arkansas.gov no later than 4 p.m. on March 6th. If you choose to submit hard copy, you must submit the original along with 4 copies of the completed application and requested attachments no later than 4 p.m. on March 6th. You may, if you submit hard copy, you may staple or clamp in the top left corner, but do not use binders, covers, or section dividers. Signatures on the original application must be in blue ink. Any questions? Yes, we have a question online.
Patty from Ozark Literacy Council asked, are hard copies required?
Hard copies are not required. You have 2 options to submit the RFP application. One option is hard copy. Another option is electronic. There's no requirement for either one, but if you submit hard copy, you do have to have the original and 4 copies. If you submit electronically, you just must email that electronic copy to adulted@arkansas.gov. Yes.
Crystal Eldridge, Pulaski County Adult Education. Crystal Eldridge, Pulaski County Adult Education. The electronic submissions, are they scanned copies with signatures, and do they need to be colored?
They don't need to be colored. You can scan that first page with the LEA signature,
Okay.
but they don't have to be
It doesn't have to be a
graphics.
color scan
No,
Okay.
no. As long as we can see, well, the color scanner may be for the blue ink,
for the blue.
just that one page, and the other ones are not required to be in color.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. One more question from online.
Patty Sullivan from Ozark Literacy asked, is a PDF the format for electronic?
PDF is acceptable for the electronic submission. The application is in a Word document. You may also submit it as a Word document if you're able to. So PDF or Word document is acceptable. Any other questions at this time? Okay, so once the application is submitted, the award notifications will be out. If you're a declined applicant, you will be notified by March 31st, 2020. If that declined applicant wishes to appeal, they must submit a letter of appeal by April 7th, 2020. Once all appeals have been reviewed and decided, all awarded applicants will be notified in writing by April 16th, 2020. If you are a declined applicant and notified and you wish to appeal, the Director of the Division of Workforce Services, the Director of Adult Education Section, and the Associate Director of Adult Education will make the final determination regarding the appeal. A response will be mailed to the applicant within 5 calendar days, and all appeal decisions will be final. Okay, acceptance guidelines. Again, these are just a few highlights. For the full description, please refer to those pages in the RFP application. Keep in mind that federal funds must supplement or add to and not supplant or take the place of other funding. Each item in the application must be answered completely and submitted in the order of application format on the pages provided, not including supporting documentation. So if you need to, you can add it within the question, or if you need to add it as a supplement, you may. A maximum of 75 pages may be submitted, including data and supporting documentation in a minimum of 12-point font when possible. That does include the demonstrated effectiveness response in addition to all 13 considerations, as well as the budget and narratives, which will be described later. Okay. The applicant information on the title page, you want to include the LEA contact person or the person fiscally responsible for that entity, the total requested grant amount for each grant. So if you're choosing to apply for the optional grant, please include those, and the LEA signature. You want to indicate the type of provider. So if you are a school district, a community-based organization, community college, university, you'll want to indicate that. Indicate the allowable activities that will be provided, and please take note of the English language acquisition and integrated education and training requirements. The consideration, as Bridget mentioned before, all 13 considerations must be answered in full. You must also take a look at the alignment of the local workforce development board plan and address that. Budgets and narratives are required. Carefully read the considerations and the accompanying questions. Utilize the rubric to ensure compliance. So we suggest comparing the rubric as you're going through the questions under each consideration. The application rubric, each of the consideration is weighted separately. They may be weighted differently, and each question within the consideration may be weighted differently. So it's a good idea to make sure you're following along and understanding what questions and how they're weighted. As an example, this is from consideration 5A on the application rubric. At the top, you'll notice the total point value of the consideration. So each of those considerations may have different point values. And then each of the sub-questions under that consideration are weighted or can be weighted differently. Another example from consideration 11, if you'll notice the responses below the consideration before the questions start, we have an indication of what the application should demonstrate. So if there's a question of evidence or the type of evidence that needs to be provided or the type of explanation, please refer to that section. And then you can also use how does the response address the question, of how will be graded within the rubric, inadequate, minimal, adequate, and excellent. Any questions about that? We have one question. Wait for the mic.
Casson Brock, ASU Three Rivers. I have a question about the narratives and the budget and everything. And you said all counties need to be included on that. And there's a 75-page maximum.
Yes.
Is that including the budget, the narratives, the justification, everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do we need to include leases, because some of those leases are lengthy?
Right. So because this is an initial projected budget, we do not expect or need to see leases, shopping carts, inventory lists, those kinds of details. We want to see how the money is being spent with detail, but keeping in mind of the page limit and the need for every single item to be documented. So we would not need to see the lease for that. Any other questions? We have one more question. Wait for the mic.
Regina Olson, ATU Ozark. Would it be suffice to say that the grant application begins on page 3, and that would be the beginning of our first 75 pages?
It would begin with the demonstrated effectiveness, the pre-screening, which I believe is page 2. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it begins with the demonstrated effectiveness, so the 75 pages would include the demonstrated effectiveness requirement.
Okay. Is that something that we complete?
Yeah, the applicant would complete that, yes. Yes.
I think.
Any other questions? We have one question online.
From Nick Ryburn at NWTI. Can Sarah please clarify her answer? She said the budget is included in the 75 pages with the application.
The budget is included in the 75 pages with the application. We have one more question in the room. Just one second, let's get a mic on you so we can hear you.
Tammy Lemons, Black River Technical College. So all total, no more than 75 pages
Yes, ma'am.
in it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that includes all supporting documentation, including the considerations, the answers to the considerations, the budget, and the narrative. Any other questions? Okay, so we will now jump in, or let's take a break. I think we're good for a break. So let's take a 5 to 10 minute break. Those of you online, we'll start back at 9:50 if you want to pause, and then we will come back and jump right into the considerations.
I know you've been busy.
That's okay.
Actually, that's what the parks are great for like so many years, and they just fall apart. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I was like,
You want what? Oh,
yeah, the last. They said, oh, so we can't go on the driver's. I don't think anything about space.
Okay, everybody, we'll come back together. I always hope that works and it doesn't. Okay, so we're gonna jump right in. For those of you online, you stepped away, we can come back and we'll get into the considerations. Just as a reminder, we will take another break about midway through the considerations. At that time, if you have not signed in, please do so. Those online, if you have not submitted who you are in the organization you're with, please do that within the chat box as well, regardless if you have a question or not. And now we will start the considerations. Dan Bingaman, our program advisor, will continue.
Hello. As Sarah said, I'm Dan Bingaman. I'm a regional program advisor. I'm going to go over considerations 1 through 5 with you, just give you a sort of a brief overview of what those are and what they mean. So consideration 1A is really all about your ability to identify and respond sufficiently to the needs of the region that you're applying to serve. You'll want to make sure that in identifying the demographics of that region and the needs of that region, that you're using reliable sources such as the US Census or the American Community Survey, probably no Wikipedia. Some of the questions that you'll need to consider as a part of addressing Consideration 1A, again, are what are the demographics of the chosen service area, including age, gender, race, ethnicity, the number of English language learners, disabilities, and educational levels. You'll want to provide the source on those and discuss any growth or decline of the number of ABE, ASC, and ESL students in that region for the past 2 program years, so 17-18 and 18-19. In discussing this, you'll want to provide an overview of the identified needs of that county population as it relates to adult education activities and explain how you plan to meet those identified needs. Consideration 1B takes that a step further. It's addressing specifically those with low literacy or individuals who are English language learners. It's important to note, and it's up there, that grant awardees must provide an English language acquisition program if you are applying for a service area with 500 or more English language learners. If that service area has 500 or more English language learners by July 1st of 2020. Some of the questions that you'll need to go over as part of addressing consideration 1B are the allowable and the required activities that you plan to include in your program, including the scope and organization of that. How will you plan to recruit and retain those individuals, including targets and how you plan to measure the recruitment and retention of those individuals. You want to describe how your program will serve individuals in the community that are most in need of literacy services, including those who are low income or who have minimal literacy skills, English language learners, and so forth. You'll also want to describe how you plan to design and deliver this instruction to this population, and how you will address the needs of English language learners, including the specific allowable activities that will be used to meet those needs. Lastly, you will want to discuss how you plan to incorporate financial literacy, digital literacy, and employability skills into instruction in your program, and how often will the applicant measure student progress as they're a part of your program. Consideration 2 is all about your ability to serve those with disabilities, both mental and physical disabilities. It's also important to note that grant awardees must have a standardized written policy and procedure that adhere to the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 by July 1st of 2020. So for consideration 2, we're really just needing you to address how you plan to address the needs of those with disabilities and ensure that your program is inclusive and that we're meeting the needs of everybody, regardless of whether or not they have a disability, emotional, mental, physical, or learning disability. Consideration 3 is all about past effectiveness in serving your eligible populations. So essentially, have you done this before, and how effective were you? We'll want you to address how many eligible individuals have you provided services to in the past, specifically for the past 2 program years. So again, 17-18 and 18-19. You'll want to discuss the percentage of applicants that, or percentage of students that made educational gains for those 2 years, including whatever assessments that you used, your procedures for your assessments, how you measured their gains, and so forth. You'll also want to discuss your past performance goals related to other primary indicators of performance and how those goals were met, identifying any strengths or weaknesses that you identified throughout that process. And lastly, you will need to discuss how you plan to meet the core indicators of performance levels that will be set over the next 4 years that are included in this RFP, and what steps will be taken to meet benchmark requirements should there be deficiencies in meeting any one category. Consideration 4 is about your program's planned alignment with the local plan and the local workforce development board that serves the area that you are applying for. Again, it's important to note that if the service area being applied for falls in more than one local workforce development board area. So if you're serving multiple counties, you've got a large footprint, you'll only need to address the local workforce development board that your LEA is headquartered in. You don't have to address all of them that represent your service area if there are multiple. As part of this, you'll identify the region where services will be offered and the priorities of the local workforce development board and the local plan, and how you plan to align your mission and your program goals with those outlined in the local plan regarding employment, training, education, and support services. You'll also want to discuss how you have participated in the activities of the local workforce development board, or how you plan to participate in those activities, providing specific details about shared cost activities and the resources used to support them. For example, maybe you have AFLA funds cover the cost of the full-time adult education teacher, and then the local board covers the cost of the classroom facility. Those are shared costs. You'll want to describe any of that that you plan for or have done. For new providers, indicate how you plan to participate in the local workforce development board activities and so forth. And then also you'll want to discuss how you have worked with titles 1, 3, and 4 to meet mutual goals. Moving on to consideration 5A. This is all about whether or not your program is sufficiently equipped to and sufficiently rigorous enough to ensure that participants in your program make educational gains and that you're able to sustain that program. Again, you'll note that grant awardees must provide 75% of your classes as managed enrollment. For current providers, this is nothing new. For those who are not current providers but who are applying for it, you'll want to discuss how you plan to implement managed enrollment. You'll talk about your attendance policies that you plan to implement or have already implemented if you're a current provider. And you'll also need to submit 3 course outlines or syllabi as examples of your educational program to demonstrate the rigor and intensity of the program to ensure that students are making gains. And then consideration 5B, also about instruction, but specifically reading instruction. For consideration 5B, you will discuss the instructional practices that you plan to employ and how those align with the Science of Reading Act, Arkansas Act 1063 of 2017, and specifically how your reading instruction will be contextualized to ensure that participants in your programs have the skills they need to compete in the workplace and meet their goals and have success outside of your program. Are there any questions about considerations 1 through 5, either in the room or online? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Jana Jenkins, and she's going to discuss considerations 6 through 11 with you.
Okay. Once again, my name is Jana Jenkins, and I'm going to go over considerations 6 through 11. So applicants should address activities that use research-based practices in reading, writing, speaking, mathematics, and English language acquisition. So applicants should describe how the college and career readiness standards or the English language proficiency standards will be integrated into instruction. 2, they should describe any other scientific research upon which instruction is based and why this research is appropriate to address the needs of the applicant's potential students. And then last, they will have to describe how and how often will the applicant measure the success of instructional practices. For consideration number 7, applicants should address activities that effectively use technology, services, and include a distance learning education plan. Note that grant awardees must integrate technology into instruction and work towards establishing a distance education program by July 1st of 2020. So the first question that applicants should address would be, how will the applicant measure, support, and ensure instructors are trained in effective use of technology? So creating a technology plan for your teachers. Number two, how will the applicant measure, support, and ensure the integration of technology in class instruction, software, and equipment? So creating a plan for how you will implement the software and equipment as well. Three, how the applicant will implement a distance learning program and include specific types of distance learning, such as, is it a hybrid class or flipped or supplemental class? And how the applicant will staff the program and evaluate and use follow-up measures. Consideration 8. The applicant should address concurrent and contextualized instruction, including an IET or integrated educational training. An IET is a service approach that allows programs to teach adult education and literacy activities, workplace preparation activities, and workforce training at the same time. So concurrently and contextually. So if you are a current provider, you will describe your current IET program, how many participants are within this program, how many have completed the program, and what credentials were obtained. If you are a new provider, you will describe what the IET program will be offered, how the participants will be recruited, and what is the expected enrollment, and what credentials or certificates will be obtained. Next, you will describe what criteria was used to select the IET program. Number 3, applicants will describe how they will transition students to employment and include the partnerships for each county in that particular service area. They will also describe how they will transition students to post-secondary education and training. And once again, include the partnerships for each county in that particular service area. Last, they will describe how the IET program provides concurrent and contextualized instruction, how are career pathways determined and utilized, how did the applicant ensure the document inclusion and integration of all components of that IET, and include the partnerships for each county in that service area. New applicants may describe how they will provide the concurrent and contextualized instruction. Consideration 9, applicants will address creating and maintaining files for professional development for highly qualified staff. Note that as of July 1st of 2020, grant awardees must maintain professional development plans for each staff and faculty member, as well as records of completed trainings. So in the first question, applicants will ensure that directors, instructors, paraprofessionals, and others meet the minimum qualifications for hire as outlined in the state's program and program policies. 2, the applicant will address the process for ensuring each faculty member has an annual high-quality professional development plan. 3, the applicant will describe how they will determine the impact of that professional development and staff performance. They will also describe how the applicant will provide staff development to ensure staff are knowledgeable about adult education policies, procedures, and priorities. Next, applicants will describe how professional development trainings will be shared with with other staff who may have not attended and what time frame. Consideration 10. Eligible providers will address how they will coordinate partnerships with other available education and training and social service resources within their community. Note that grant awardees will be required to contribute to the operational costs of all Area 1 stop centers by July 1st of 2020. So consideration 10, question 1. How will the applicant coordinate with local resources to develop partnerships? Name the specific coordinated agencies and services that have not been addressed in consideration 4, and please include partnerships for each county in that service area. 2, how will the applicant coordinate with local one-stop centers and name specific coordinated agencies and services? 3, how will the applicant coordinate with education and training providers and name those specific coordinated trainings? Consideration 11, applicants will address how the activities will offer flexible schedules and support support services to enable students to complete the program. So applicants will have to describe how they will address the needs of individuals with disabilities and special needs. 2, they will have to identify barriers and coordinate support services to address the needs of the local population and provide a referral process and local resources. 3, the applicant will ensure instruction is accessible, providing the flexibility needed to meet the needs of students, including evenings, weekends, and distance learning classes. What is the rationale used to determine class topic, location, days, and times, and include the most current class schedule with names, days, times, and locations. Next, they will have to describe how they will utilize their career development facilitators or career service providers to assist students with career planning and identifying career pathways based on local needs, interests, and aptitude. Are there any questions for considerations 6 through 11? All right, next up is John Lee, and he will complete the considerations.
Okay, going to cover considerations 12 and 13, as well as talking about the one-stop delivery system, budget narratives, and CNI funding. Starting with consideration 12, this is whether the eligible provider maintains a high-quality information management system and also using that system to report our measurable participant outcomes and monitor program performance. For our current providers, that system is LACIS. So that's what we use right now. As of to note, it is required that all of our grant awardees have standardized written policies and procedures for things like student intake and exit, pre and post testing, and also the personnel that is going to be monitoring the data. Under consideration 12, the questions that we are going to be looking for, the applicant is going to have to address how they will adhere to the timely entry of the data, as well as using that data for quarterly reports. The applicant is also going to have to address how they will ensure that the data is valid, as well as including a description of their data collection and data entry process. The applicant is going to need to address how they're going to use the data to improve performance and make any programming decisions that include recruitment and retention. Any questions for consideration 12 before moving on to 13? For consideration 13, this is whether the local area in which the eligible provider is located in has a demonstrated need for additional English language acquisition programs as well as civics education programs. And just a reminder, this has been mentioned before, but if you are in an area that has 500 or more English language learners, you are required to offer instruction to that population. So under consideration 13, the applicant will need to address what the ELL population in the local area is and provide the data source. The applicant will also need to address what the anticipated growth of that population is based on the Department of Labor statistics. The applicant will also need to address the program's experience and ability to offer instructions and services to English language learners. As well as, at a minimum, they'll need to address instructors' education and experience, curriculum and materials, which need to include employability skills, career pathways, financial and digital literacy, as well as civics education. Okay. Any questions for consideration 13? Okay. So for the one-stop delivery system, the applicant will need to address how they plan on fulfilling their required responsibilities to their one-stop partner. So the applicant is going to need to address how they plan on providing access to adult education and literacy services through the one-stop. They will also need to address how they plan on using a portion of funds which are provided under WIOA to maintain the one-stop delivery system, and that could include payments of infrastructure costs, which are agreed upon under the Memorandum of Understanding and the local board. The applicant will need to address how they plan to enter into a MOU with the local board. They will also need to address, under the terms of the MOU, how the applicant plans to participate in the operation of the one-stop. And they will also need to address how they plan on providing representation to the state board. Okay. Any questions for one-stop delivery system?
I'm Larry from the Little Rock School District. What state board are you talking about when you say provide representation to the state board?
Oh, teacher.
My name is Larry Slisher from Little Rock School District.
Yeah.
We said provide representation to the state board, and what state, which state board are we talking about? The Workforce Development Board or?
Larry, let me answer that. Trina Miles, Director of Adult Education. So as you guys are the local Workforce Development Board providers, we have an adult education bylaw. An adult education provider is supposed to sit on the local Workforce Development Board. So we have a director appointed to each local Workforce Development Board. So the representation of the state board would actually be for me, but this is probably a error typing. It's supposed to be provide representation to the local Workforce Development Board versus the state. So it's talking about you all and not me at the state office.
Debbie Foss Kendrick, Crawford County Adult Ed. We aren't in the one stop. Okay, in our area, Fort Smith is. So how do we address this? Because we don't even have anybody over there. Fort Smith takes care of everything.
Are there still services that are being offered? Okay, so you would address that. You would address what you're currently providing.
So just Trina Miles again, just to follow up with Debbie. So, some of you guys are co-located, so already in the one stop, so you should already be providing services. There are some areas, that because it's only 10 workforce development board, we have 36 providers in the state. So for some of those who are co-located, sometimes they have to be the ones to actually do the memorandum of understanding. But all of it, for all of them, the different IFAs plan should have had some consultation with each local workforce development of that in that particular region. So I think for the state of Arkansas, for our current providers, we already have local memorandums of understanding in place as well as IFAs. The challenge is going to probably be for some of the new providers to connect with them because we've signed MOUs and IFAs, they're already in existence.
Any other questions in the room or online regarding one stops? Okay, so moving on to budget narratives. The applicant is going to need to describe in detail how the funds that they are applying for are going to be implemented for the project. And so this is going to be, so there's going to be basically a budget packet that you are going to have for each of the grants that you are applying for. So within that budget packet, the applicant is going to need to include a composite budget that reflects all of the counties within the awarded service area, a budget narrative for each county, and a composite line item budget page containing all of the grants. Okay. And this was mentioned earlier, but please do not include any shopping carts, any lease agreements, any invoices, things of that nature. And again, just as a reminder, the budget, the narrative, and any of the other supporting documentation is included in that 75-page max. So be detailed in the narrative, but don't go crazy with it. Any questions with budgets before we move on to correctional institutional funds?
Teresa Kaufman, UAM Adult Ed Director. When you're talking about your budgets being separated per county, do you want per county per page? Because if I already have 5, that's going to take quite a few of my pages away from my 75 pages. And that's just going to be for my budget narrative.
You're asking about the narrative, correct?
So one page, I mean, like they can't. So like if I do a.
Are you saying single page? Single
Why do
sided?
they have to be broken out per county? Because if I do per county, D&E alone was going to be 10 pages. And that's just minimum per county.
The one thing to keep in mind is that, excuse me, you will not need the type of detail that you would normally provide in a narrative. So even though you're breaking it out per county, you're just saying what will go to each county. It's not the amount of detail when you have a 4 or 5 page narrative.
But I can combine and put Drew County list,
Right.
Chico County list, so it doesn't have to be a page for each
For
county.
each county, no.
I don't have to separate them,
No.
say per county.
Right, or in each one you may indicate, you're spending, you have so many teachers, this is the cost for the teachers in Drew County, whatever. And break
I
it
just
out
need to be
that
able to
way
list it
within it.
what I'm going to do in each county.
Right.
Okay.
And we have a question here on the web.
Sherry Connor of North Ark Adult Education asks, are we required to provide an initial budget page for each county and a composite initial budget page?
Can you repeat the question?
Are we required to provide an initial budget page for each county and a composite initial budget page?
No, just a composite that reflects all the counties, but you don't need individual budget pages for each county.
Let me repeat that. So actually, yes, you will, have a budget page for each county because we want to know, well, no, you will not for this because this is DNE funding. I'm thinking about the ABE funding. For those of you who receive state funding, you normally, during the normal process, you would do the composite by county using ABE funds. But because these are DNE funds, you do not necessarily have to do it unless you're planning on utilizing DNE funds in those counties. So, because some providers, like for our current providers, they get state funding, and ABE fund stands for the basic education funds. So for ABE funds, every county gets an allotment of funds. So when you're doing your budgets during the regular year, you have to show how you're spending money to represent those counties. But today, we're only talking about federal funds for DNE. However, some providers do utilize DNE funding to serve all counties, but it's not required like your ABE funds. So does that make sense? And guys, for this budget, and those of you on the phone, don't worry about spending a lot of time doing it. We just want to see a brief overview of how you're thinking about allocating funds. Because think about it, those of you who are current providers, we will, if you get awarded, your application gets advanced, then we will provide you your state and your federal funds, which may or may change depending on what you receive for state and federal. So we don't want you spending a lot of time on this process. We just want to know, have an idea of how you plan on utilizing the funds and ensuring that these funds are done in a way that's allowable according to the grants. So please do not get caught up on this section. We're more interested in the 13 considerations and the fact that you have demonstrated effectiveness. Yeah, we good?
Okay. Going to move on to CNI funding, correctional institutional.
You got a quick question?
Karen Alexander, ATU. The question on, if you're gonna put salaries in there, do we have to break out the matching into each FICA insurance, workers' comp, or do we just lump that as matching? Because she was mentioning to try to keep it concise in your narrative is what I'm asking. You have to break out your matching in the narrative or just lump together.
Yeah, for this purpose, you can just lump it. That's fine. Yeah. So we have a question online.
Sherry Connor from North Ark Adult Education says, please clarify, are we required to use DNE funds in each county served by our program? If I do not normally spend DNE funds in a particular county, do I need to address this county in my RFP?
There you go. So while in the RFP application, you must address all counties in the service area and how you will serve them. That is required. In the budget narrative, if you don't intend to spend, as Dr. Miles outlined, in those counties, within the budget, you are not required to describe or to allot funds for each of those counties within DNE. However, in the RFP considerations, when you are addressing those, in the specific questions that ask about the service area, you must address all counties in the service area that you are applying for.
Any other questions for budget narratives? Okay, we are going to move on to correctional institutional funding. Just a couple notes about this, since this is an optional grant that you can apply for. If the applicant is applying for both CNI, and D&E, you would complete the CNI section in addition to all the other sections of the RFP, in addition to the budget information that we just talked about. If you are applying for CNI only, you need to complete the CNI section, but also the demonstrated effectiveness and the title page, plus all of the budget information that we just went over. The composite budget page, the narrative, and the line item page. Any questions about that? Any clarification? Okay. So the CNI funds are going to be used for educational programs and services for criminal offenders within a correctional institution. Okay. Academic and programs included for this can be adult education and literacy activities, special education, integrated education and training, career pathways, concurrent enrollment, peer tutoring, and also reentry services. Also to note, we obviously want to serve all of our students, but within a correctional institution, priority shall be given to students who have a plan to be released within 5 years. Okay. This is just for clarification on what a correctional institution is. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but it can mean any prison, jail, detention center. It can also mean a halfway house or any other type of community rehabilitation center as well. Okay. Any questions, clarification on that? So for some of the questions under the CNI section, the applicant is going to have to address how many students in CNI settings they served in 17-18 and 18-19. And with that information, it's going to have to be broken up by ABE students, ASE students, and ESL students. The applicant will also need to address how they plan to deliver instruction in order to raise the educational levels of students in a correctional institutional setting. We will be looking for intensity of hours and also duration as well of the class. And then the applicant will also need to address how CNI funds will supplement and not supplant program funds. The applicant will also need to address which activities, which were described earlier, they are going to participate in, and also provide details of how they plan on delivering those activities and services. And then finally, the applicant needs to address their program's past success with this population in a correctional institutional setting, and how those participants are selected. And for any of our first-time applicants, they should describe how the program is going to measure success while providing those services and activities. Any questions regarding correctional institutional funds?
Regina Olson, HU Ozark. Since this is optional, is this in addition to the 75 pages? Or does it have to be within 75 pages?
It's within the 75.
Sorry. So the correctional institution, since it is optional, it is a separate application technically, because a person or a provider or applicant can just apply for this and not apply for the DNE. So we don't want to necessarily penalize a provider or potential applicant who also responds to D&E and this one, because it'll go against. But again, back to the budget, don't get so much caught up in the words. We're looking for quality in the writing and not necessarily the quantity. And so, so this would not count against your 75 pages because it is a separate application. But the budget component would count towards your 75. So John didn't know anything about that one, so so it's not his fault. That's what I'm here for, in the back room to interject, because I didn't come to any of the training, so that's on me. Thank you, John.
Any other questions regarding C&I budgets, one-stops, considerations 12 and 13? If
Terrell Washington, I'm with ASU Mid-South. I had a question on the peer tutoring as a method to provide instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Is peer tutoring an NRS instructional method, or will it be counted any hours that a participant spends in peer tutoring? Is that counted as non-NRS?
that would be up to the program. I mean, if that student is, still, in the program and they're making gains, or they are a student who could make gains, then they would still be counted as NRS. But whether or not they're non-NRS, that's going to be up to the program to decide. Okay, we are going to take a quick 5-minute break. So for those online, we'll be back in here at about 10:40.
So you're doing. Okay. Then, I'll do
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started again. So we're going to finish up. We've got one more piece and then we'll finish up. If everybody can take your seat and online if you want to come back together. Okay, everybody needs to take a seat so we can finish up. Okay, so our last portion is going to be our integrated English literacy and civics education. Again, this is optional, similar to the CNI. So if you choose to apply to this as well, you may, but it's not required. Similar to the CNI grant, if you're applying for DNE funds as well as IELCE, you will need to address all 13 considerations in addition to the questions for IELCE specifically. If you are applying for IELCE only, you do not have to address all 13 considerations, but you do need to complete the demonstrated effectiveness title page, all questions within the IELCE application, as well as the budget narrative and line item. Budget page narrative and line item. Okay, the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, or Section 243 program, is delivered in combination with an integrated education and training activities through career pathways. So that includes partnerships with business and industry and other educational institutions, along with your language instruction to address those local needs. English language instruction is included, and that should address reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Civics activities will need to be addressed that include the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as Octave Civics Education Curriculum that includes those 4 pillars of civics. As well as the workforce training that includes soft skills, employability certificates, and an integrated education and training program. IELCE services are provided to adult English language learners, including professionals with degrees and credentials in their native countries. I'm going to pause. We have a question online.
Tamara Lambert from Seahawk College says, will we receive a list of all attendees from both sessions, online and in person?
No, that will not be sent out for attendees. The PowerPoint will be available on our website after the bidders conference. Okay, so the English language learners that can be served under IELCE will include any English language learner, including those professionals with degrees and credentials in their native countries. So that means that the requirement to participate in an IELCE program is simply that you are an English language learner. Your background education, as well as your proficiency level in English is not, it can be varied. So there's not a requirement for that. And the program should work towards those individuals to achieve competency in the English language and acquire basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as parents, workers, and citizens in the U.S. The services shall include instruction in literacy and English language acquisition, and instruction on the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, and may include that workforce training. So a graphic to visualize the IELCE program, similar to the IET, so notice it's delivered in combination. So literacy, English language acquisition, as well as civics education must be delivered in combination with an available IET. And an IET, again, has 3 components: the adult education literacy activity, workforce preparation, and workforce training. So an IELCE program must have an IET available to those participants in IELCE. They are not required to enroll in the IET program, but it must be available for them. Within the application, you'll need to address these questions. So how will the program deliver the content and activities as described through the effective practices that enable ELLs to increase their English language proficiency in combination with those civics education, workforce training, including an IET, to better understand and navigate governmental, educational, and workplace systems and key American institutions, including preparation for employment leading to economic self-sufficiency. You should include an instructional or course outline, the materials and resources used, and 3 to 5 sample activities. You also want to indicate how the eligible provider will co-enroll participants in an IET that's provided within the local or regional workforce development area from sources other than that section 243. Include a recruitment plan and an orientation or transition plan to support those students specifically for an IET. You want to indicate the number of anticipated ELL participants in the IELCE program, including the criteria and or student profile for enrolling in an IELCE program. Include the percentage of decline or growth between 17-18 and 18-19 program years in respect to the number of English language learners in that program. Keep in mind those students may be entering or have an educational functioning level in ABE as well as ESL. They just need to be an English language learner. For those that have current providers, I'll pause for a question online.
Patty Sullivan from Ozark Literacy Council asked, do you want us to address pursuing funding, tuition, etc. for IETs?
That can be included in your response. We have another question online. Okay. So for those that have currently received or are currently receiving IELCE funds, you please indicate the participants in that program in 17-18 and 18-19. Of those, how many enrolled and completed an IET? If you're not currently receiving IELCE funds, you want to indicate the number of ELLs enrolled in a similar type of program, including the percentage of decline or growth between 17-18 and 18-19 in respect to the number of ABE, ASE, and ESL students. Fifth question, what is the actual or anticipated ELL population growth based on the Department of Labor statistics? Okay, any questions about the IELCE grant? No questions? Okay, we will finish up with Todd Hunter. We have a question online.
Patty Sullivan from Ozark asked again, growth in county only, not SMS?
I'm not sure what SMS means, but you would want to indicate the service area. So the anticipated decline or growth relates to the service area that you're applying for. One more question, clarification from Patty Sullivan.
She clarifies metro area.
Oh, if that includes your service area, you're applying for the county. Not a city you're located within that county. So you want to address the entire service area.
All right, next we'll go over the application checklist. This is just a way of refresher. Remember the applications are due March the 6th by 4 p.m. Electronic submissions can be sent to the adulted@arkansas.gov email. If you choose to submit hard copies, be sure to submit 1 original, clearly identified, and 4 copies of the application. The original needs to be signed in blue ink. And complete all and submit all applicable pages in numerical order. Information to be considered, be sure to submit the demonstrative effectiveness for each of the grants you choose to apply for. Also address all 13 considerations and/or the CI and IELCE considerations in the optional grants. Describe the alignment with your local workforce development plans. Also, for your budgets, be sure you submit the proposed budget page for the fiscal year 2021, the narrative, and the line item budgets. All three must accompany your budgets. Any questions? Once you leave today, it can be emailed to adulted@arkansas.gov. Responses you can find at the below URL, and they're updated on a weekly basis, so you can check them periodically to satisfy any questions you may have. Hard copy submissions can be sent to this address, and the email is also included there as well. Before you leave today, if you haven't already, be sure to sign the sign-in sheet in the back so we can have a record of your attendance. And I see a question.
John Robinson, Pulaski County School District. Two questions I have. To show our efficiency and effectiveness, I would like to see if we can get a hold of our Table 5 information for job placement numbers for those 2 years and also for college placement for those 2 years. That's calculated for our funding for those 2 years, but I don't think we've ever get those numbers to us, so I was just curious.
As part, for those that are currently funded as part of a regular business, we will be, due to the new system, the new measures, Table 5, for those of you who are currently provided using LACES, have not been updated. And so we will, as regular business, be sending out your information of employment and post-secondary, along with some follow-up questions regarding certifications that we have done in previous years. So you can expect that fairly quickly by the end of this week or early next week.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Miles?
We have a question in the corner over here. Terrell Washington, ASU Mid-South, and Creighton County Literacy Council. I had a question around, I'm applying for D&E funds as a consortium, and could the Literacy Council of Creighton County apply for those funds as well, or would it have to be one budget?
Terrell, I'm glad you brought that question up. I just actually emailed our federal coordinator to get some guidance on that. So if it's okay with you, I will post a question on the website once I hear back from them.
James White, ASU Three Rivers. On the proposed budget and the proposed line item budget, here on the checklist, it said do the budget for the fiscal year July 1st, 2020 through 21. And then on the, where it talks about the budget narrative on the previous page, it said a budget for the 4-year period. So do we prepare just a 1 12-month budget, or do we prepare 4 12 months?
Let's just do a 1 year, because really there's no need to project out 4 years if we're not sure moving forward what the numbers are going to look like. Any other questions? Okay, well, we thank you guys for your time. I'm not gonna repeat what Todd has said because we've already given you the information, but we're looking forward to reading some good applications and working with you guys in the future. So without further ado, safe travels, and if you think of a question following this, just send us an email. Thank you.